Hello boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of Pencil and Tools, and in today's video I'm going to show you my setup for a proper and stress-free self-leveling compound installation. The first thing that I'm going to do is determine how many bags of self-leveling compound that I will need. To do this, I evenly distribute the room, take some measurements, note them down on the floor, count these measurements up and divide them by the amount of measurements that I took. This gives me an indication of the average height that I need to fill in per square meter. The next thing that I do is check the amount of volume that I can create per bag of compound, and then I just multiply this until I reach the complete volume that I need to pour on this slab. Since I already somewhat leveled the underground during the test phase, I was able to evenly distribute the room into rows. Each row would represent one bucket of compound. The measurements are done, but before I can start, I need to make sure that the compound is not able to escape. To do this, I carefully check the room for any openings and I just use duct tape to cover it up. Here I'm making sure that any loose parts from the previous test are not going to fall into my compound as I'm pouring. Now I just give the room a complete vacuum and we are good to go. Before we can get started though, I have to calibrate my bucket, and to do so I'm placing the bucket on a level floor. Then I'm using something that I can rely on from the kitchen to measure the right amount of water that is instructed on the bag, place it in the bucket, and then I'm using a permanent marker to indicate the correct water level. To make sure that everything is easy to read, I'm making markings on the complete inside wall of the bucket. Now I'm filling in again the same amount of water to just give it a check, and everything seems to be correct, so up we go. The very next day I looked at the sky and I saw a sign in the sky that was telling me it was time to jump into my boots and get started. For the final setup, I've installed my laser already. I also have a trolley to transport every batch to the back of the room. Then here we have the bagging station, everything nice and high so it's easy on the back. Bags goes directly into the buckets here in front. And then we also have a bucket of water to directly clean off the mixer. And then here in the back we have the cleaning station with a DIY filter system, garden hose, and of course our calibrated bucket on a level wall. To prevent the cleaning water from contaminating the bottom of my garden, I made sure that I'm using this DIY filter system, which is essentially nothing more than a blanket that traps the water and the compound, which contains plastic parts. As the rinsing water passes through the blanket, the only thing that remains is the compound slush that you can just shovel off and collect to bring to the recycling center. For the actual installation, I've asked my brother and my mom to help me out. So my brother is in the mixing station preparing all the compound. My mom is active in the rinsing station. She's cleaning out the buckets and making sure that there's new water for every time a new batch needs to be prepared. And yeah, I'm the poor guy. If you are a simple DIY person like I am, then I really recommend to work in the setup that I just explained to you, and have 2 pairs of extra hands to help you out. You don't have much time in between compounds before it starts hardening out, and these extra hands will reduce the amount of stress that you experience drastically. In the first batch I still had some unmixed clumps of material, and the way to resolve this is to just use your trowel, squish them, and then they will dissolve into the mixture. For the next batch I asked my brother to heighten the speed a little bit, and that solved the problem. Once the bucket has been emptied out, I just use a trowel to force all the material into the corners, and then I just let the material do the job by leveling itself. The markings that I made on the wall earlier give me a clear indication of how wide that each row should be, and this is what I keep in mind as I'm working towards the end. Here again you can see that I have these clumps of unmixed material. Again, I'm just using my trowel to smear them out, and then they will dissolve and get covered by the rest of the material. This compound is flowing pretty good, but to make sure that it's a proper flow and everything is distributed evenly, I'm giving it a pass with the spike roller. Now for this particular project I bought 3 of these pouring buckets. They're dirt cheap anyway, and you want to make sure that all the tools are constantly being cleaned off. So this means that the buckets will be cleaned off in between pours, but also your trowels and the spike roller. If you don't clean off the buckets and the trowels, there's a good chance that the stuff will harden out, and as you're pouring, some of the stuff will get off the buckets and end up in your freshly poured floor, and this will remain visible. As I'm using the spike roller, you can clearly see how that edge in the middle of the 2 batches is disappearing, and this is exactly what I want to achieve. Now on the left side you can also see that there's white spots appearing, and this is the water that was still on the spike roller. So I recommend to really give it a good spin, making sure that it is nice and dry, and then you can continue to work safely. As I'm using the spike roller to blend in batches, I'm also making sure that the first poured batch is still wet enough so that when I'm passing through with the spike roller, I'm not leaving behind any markings that you will see in the final floor. This is just something that you have to keep in mind depending on the speed that your floor is drying. Now once you get the hang of this, it's just a matter of a repeat process, easy peasy. As I was pouring, I was using the laser to check if the compound was really level, and this turned out to be great. Now as for the final part, I just used a stoppage ruler that I installed. This was level anyway, so that is the clear indication that I'm on the right track. Now as we came to the end of the floor, I also made sure that the drying process is going to be nice and evenly, and for this reason I installed these parasols. If all goes well, you should be ending up with something that looks a little bit like this. And as you can see, there's a lot of water on the top of the surface. So to make sure that everything is evaporating simultaneously and I don't have the crystallization like I did in the tests, I've installed a fan to get a proper ventilation. After installation, it took about 3 hours for it to dry up a little bit and harden out. But after 3 hours we were able to walk on it and get on with our business. Of course, this floor needs many more days to completely dry out before I can finish it off with either a PU or an epoxy. So here we are the very next day, and as you can see there's still some wet spots, but that doesn't matter, the floor is hard enough to walk on. One final tip, if you're working in a garage like me, pick a day that there's no wind, because this all blew in just the very next day, and that will be a complete disaster if you're just pouring. Now I really hope that this video inspired you to try the same, and if you have any questions, just let me know in the comments.